10 after 8 in the morning, and the phone rang, and my mother answered it. At that time, we only had one phone downstairs and in the dining room, and so she came up and said, "Are you in trouble, Lou?" And I said, "No, why, Louis?" She always called me Louis. I said, "No, why?" And she said, "Well, somebody's asking you for Louis Anthony Conter on the phone." And I said, "I don't know." So I got up, dressed, went down, answered the phone. It was the Navy Department. And they said, "We've got a draft going out at 5:45 tonight for San Diego, and got 6 men that the last examination, they can't pass the examination. It's been 8 months since they were here, and they can't pass it." So anyway, they asked me to come down, and I went down and talked to them. And said, "Okay, I'll go in for 4 years." And went out to Swift and picked up my check, because those days they paid you in cash and an envelope, because you were making 30 cents an hour, 40 hours a week, $12 a week, so it wasn't very much money. I called my girlfriend, I called my mother, and called my dad, and said, "I'm leaving at 5:45 for San Diego." And so I was 18 and didn't need any signatures or anything, so that was my first train ride. It was 5:45. I got on the train in Denver and went to San Diego, and that's how I joined the Navy. It was kind of a fluke, but at that time in '39, everybody knew there was going to be war sometime, and there was no draft or anything. You did it on your own, but if you did 4 years, you come back and go to college, you were in better shape to go to football and everything at 22 than you were at 18. So that's why I did it. To World War II, you've got to go back to 1932, when Japan took over Korea and Manchuria and down through the eastern coast of China. They killed 3 or 4 million Chinese in the process. And they were practically down to Shanghai by the time December the 7th rolled along. So in the 7 years before Pearl Harbor happened, they were becoming a very big power in the Pacific. And Asiatic theater was where the Asiatic fleet was, up the Yangtze. Remember, Panay was sunk in '37. And so we were pretty well knowledgeable. And of course, I was more at the front and knew what was going on.
People forget that the world was already burning 10 years before Pearl Harbor was set on fire. Millions were already dead in East Asia by December in 1941 from very brutal fighting and unspeakable cruelties. And among many other atrocities, the Japanese murdered roughly 200,000 Chinese civilians in the Rape of Nanking in 1937. And in 1940, the Japanese Air Force dropped fleas infected with the bubonic plague on the cities of Ningbo and Changde. And meanwhile, in the West, many countries in Europe and parts of Africa were already swamped by the Axis tide. Over a dozen countries were under attack, fallen, or had thrown in with their aggressors. Rhineland, Ethiopia, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, France, Britain, Somaliland, Egypt, Romania, Greece, Libya, and Yugoslavia were all affected during this time. And in the Soviet Union, the Nazi siege of Leningrad, where an estimated 1 million civilians would eventually die, mostly of starvation, was already underway. In the very week of Pearl Harbor, the German advance on Moscow was impeded and the Russian counteroffensive launched, with very heavy casualties. 4 months before Pearl Harbor, the Nazis devised the final solution for all the Jews because they did not think that their flying squads of SS henchmen in occupied Eastern Europe was efficient enough. And in 1942, we would see the construction of the infamous Nazi death camps. America was still at peace in December of 1941, but it was an uneasy peace, and there was little doubt that the war was coming for America, though no one knew where or when it would come if it did. In preparation for this, the Pacific Fleet had been stationed in America's Pacific bastion, Pearl Harbor.
remember that I was 39 when I went in. I went aboard the Arizona, and we were at Long Beach. And in April 1st of 1940, the Pacific Fleet left Long Beach, San Diego, and Seattle and went to the Hawaiian Islands for exercises. And when we finished the exercises in April of 1940, and close to Hawaiian Islands, they changed the fleet home port from Long Beach to Pearl Harbor. So we stayed in Pearl Harbor after that. And from that time on until December the 7th, the exercise at sea was half the fleet was out and half the fleet was in port. And you prepared for war is what you did. You did a lot of exercise and a lot of training, and you prepared for war. And so when Pearl Harbor came along, we were prepared, knew what was coming. Remember, I think it was in November of 1940 that they started the draft. And so we had people aboard the ship that had signed up voluntarily, but no draft. And when the draft came, why, a lot of people came in, and especially officers who graduated from college and went to ROTC. So the fleet at the time, I was, when I went aboard the ship, I was put in Division Number 2, and my battle station was the lower handling room and Number 2 turret, which is the one that exploded on December the 7th. But we didn't have much money in those days, and so most of my time, free time, I laid on the hammock and studied, because I made seaman second class, and you had to be pretty sharp to get seaman first class, and especially before 3 years or 4 years, because it's only 3 years before you got first class and 4 to 5 years before you got third class petty officer. So I laid up on my hammock netting and studied a lot. And hammock netting is where you stowed your hammock every day, and then at night you put it up in your hooks. You had 2 hooks on the beam in the division. And so I laid up there, and Bob Sink, who was the chief quartermaster, came down and said, "Lou, I see that you're reading and studying a lot." Said, "How would you like to be a quartermaster striker?" And the quartermaster gang in the Navy is navigation division. And I said, "I'd love to be a quartermaster, because I knew I'd get out of the lower handling room and I'd get off of scrubbing decks and holystoning decks and shining bright work, and I'd be in the navigation department studying maps and charts and grids and where we were, and also being quartermaster of the watch, keeping the log on the quarterdeck and of the bridge when they were underway and everything." So within about a week, I was transferred from second division to the N division. But I'd been in second division about 6 months then, 7 months. Because the first 3 months you're aboard, when you come aboard as a boot, after a week or two aboard, you get to know the ship, you're in mess cooking. You go for 3 months, and that's when you pull down the tables and you put up the chairs and you clean and you peel potatoes and you feed the men 3 meals a day in your division, in your section. And usually each mess cook has about 35 or 40 men to take care of. And when they get finished, you clean up all the dishes, take them in the gallery, and you put the tables and chairs back up on their hangers for the rest of the day, so the deck's completely clear all the time. And you go in and do the dishes and work in there, get ready. But after 3 months, you've done it for the rest of your Navy time. You've done your mess cooking. So we started studying maps and charts and grids, latitude and longitude, sun sights, taking star sights at night, and working with the quarterdeck. On the quarterdeck is quartermaster of the watch, or keeping the log, or assistant quartermaster. And then during general quarters, my job at that time as a quartermaster was to steer the ship. And so I was channel helmsman, in and out.
Many in the United States expected that eventually the US and Japan would go to war because of the ongoing Japanese aggression in Asia. However, most thought that the war would start in the US territory of the Philippines, or at the US possessions in the South Pacific. With the redeployment of the Pacific Fleet to Pearl Harbor by early 1941,
Many in the Japanese imperial government concluded that an attack on the Pacific Fleet would cripple the ability of the U.S. to counter Japanese conquests in Southeast Asia. As the year went on, pilots began training for the mission as the Japanese military dictatorship weighed whether to stage the attack. In July, the U.S. banned oil shipments to Japan. These sanctions could have crippled the Japanese military, and planning for the attack on Pearl Harbor shifted into high gear. With planning nearly complete, Emperor Hirohito approved the attack plan on November the 5th. On November 26th, the Japanese strike force, led by 6 carriers with 408 attack aircraft aboard, sailed from Japan under radio silence. Emperor Hirohito gave final approval for the attack on December 1st, while the fleet was en route to the staging area in waters northwest of Hawaii. Meanwhile, intensive talks between the American and Japanese governments had been in progress in Washington. However, the Japanese government neither gave notice that the talks were being broken off, nor was a declaration of war even written until after the attack. Sunday, December 7th, broke warm and sunny at Pearl Harbor. No one there knew that America was about to be pulled into the inferno of raging worldwide war.
Took over quartermaster of the watch at 7:45 in the morning on the quarterdeck, and 5 minutes late when the raid came in here, and we sounded general quarters, and 9 minutes after 8 we blew up. We saw the planes coming in. They came in Wakanio, and they came over the hill, and as soon as they came over the hill, we saw the red stars, and we knew that we were under attack immediately. It was, we had general quarters that sounded within 30 seconds, and all the men went to their battle stations. It took us 50 years. Newsmen, a lot of them like to enhance a lot of their programs and their projects. And they said the band had played in the Battle of the Bands the night before, and they were all asleep in their bunks, and they all got killed in their bunks, and that was complete fabrication. We had about 10 of them up there to play colors at 5 minutes to 8 in the morning, and the rest, as soon as we sounded general quarters, they all laid down their instruments, and the whole band went to their battle stations, and they were all killed at their battle stations. They were not in their bunks to sleep, and nobody was in their bunks to sleep when the ship blew up. So, first thought, well, we were highly trained at that time, and so we just acted pretty well automatically that we were under attack, and I was sounded general. I was in the quarterdeck. Captain Van Valkenburg went to the bridge, and Admiral Kidd, and Captain Van Valkenburg says to secure the quarterdeck and come to the bridge. And yes, sir, and that's what you said. And we had a guy, a gunner's mate, that was Don Graham. He was on the Panay when it was sunk in the Yankees in '37, and he was aboard the ship then. And he says, well, the vessel was outboard of us. We had to cut it loose. So he grabbed it, and I said, let's get it done. And he grabbed an axe and went forward and cut the lines forward and came aft and cut them, and the ship blew up. He got the Navy Cross for his actions. And we knew it was war right then. When the planes came over, right away we took a bomb along number 4 turret. In the starboard side of the aft quarterdeck where we were. It's the one that knocked Commander Fuqua unconscious, but a bunch of us were standing on the forward end of turret 3 and didn't get the blast, so we didn't get knocked out. But 13 minutes from 5 minutes to 8 when it started, we got general quarters sounding, got all the watertight doors closed and everything else, and everybody going to their battle stations, Captain and Admiral to the bridge, and Kurt Haynes, the quartermaster, up to the bridge, and we were getting the vessel outboard of us and getting the gangplanks off and onto the ship and everything, and we blew up at 9 minutes after 8. So we didn't have too much time to think about much except doing our job, because when the plane dropped, it was a lucky hit, 1,800 pound armor-piercing bomb. It went in on the starboard side, on the right-hand side, alongside of number 2 turret, and through 5-6 decks into the lower handling room. And the lower handling rooms is where we stored all the powder and ammunition for our 14-inch guns. The forward part of the ship, we had 3 14-inch guns in turret 1 and 3 14-inch guns in turret 2, and over 1 million pounds of powder in that lower handling room in round bags about this long, about this big around, and were 105 pounds apiece, because each rifle took 4 bags to shoot a shell, 1,600 pound shell, out 20 miles. And so it took 12 bags of those to fill that one truck. You shoot all 3 guns at one time. So you didn't think much during it until after it blew up. And we blew up at 9 minutes after 8. When it blew up, the bow of the ship came out of the water 30 to 40 feet and sunk straight back down. And everything from the mainmast forward was afire, because 1 million pounds of black powder blew up at one time. And you've seen the pictures of it on movies and everything. It was so loud, we on deck didn't hear it. It was so loud, it was way above us. It would knock our ears clear out. We couldn't hear it. But we knew what happened, and it was fire. The guys were falling off the ship and into the water. Oil was burning, and the vessel threw a line across to the forward mast where the fire control tower is, because there were 5 men up there that when the forward mast started to bend over from the burning, and they grabbed the line and secured it and went across the line, and when the third one went across the line, and Lauren Bruner burnt in two and fell into the burning water.
The Arizona suffered the heaviest damage in the Pearl Harbor attack. Of the ship's complement of 1,512 officers and crew, 1,177 died in the blast, or subsequently from their injuries. Overall, 2,403 Americans died, while 1,178 were injured. The Arizona was a total loss. Altogether, 18 ships were sunk or run aground, and 188 aircraft were destroyed. But the Japanese were not done with these devastating attacks. The same day, they launched surprise attacks on the American possessions of Guam and the Philippines. At the same time, they also launched attacks on the British colonies of Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaya. With the nation stunned by these attacks, on December 8th, President Franklin Roosevelt addressed Congress and asked for a declaration of war.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
And so it was, the fires of war came to America at last. Back at Pearl Harbor, though the wreckage was still alight, the military began the task of recovering their fallen and rebuilding the shattered Pacific Fleet.
So you didn't have much. Then, we fought the fire. Guys coming out of the fire, Commander Fuqua told us to grab them and lay them down on deck because they wanted to jump over in the water, and the water was burning. They died. You'll even render them unconscious if you have to lay them down until we can get them into the boats to get them to the hospital. And we were aboard the ship for 30 minutes after that, till 8:35 or something, and it started settling into the water, and we were up to our knees in water, and so he said abandon ship, and we got the guys into the lifeboats. we got the guys in there, we got off the ship, and we fought the fire until Tuesday night, and 24 hours a day. And the fire went out while we just was over base force then, and we had no bunks or anything to sleep in. It was over base force, and they just kind of collapsed till Wednesday night when the fire started cooling down on Friday and Saturday, Sunday, 3 days. It started cooling. Ship started cooling down. Then about 25, 30 of us went back aboard, and we had set up some shallow water diving helmets to put on. And Pete Huzar was our senior diver aboard. He was a water tender first class, and he had diving suit. And he'd stay down 4 or 5 hours, and we'd stay down maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes while the guys were pumping air to us. And we cruised the back stern part of the ship to the officers' quarters to see if we could find bodies and people down there. Maybe some of them still alive with watertight doors closed, you know, but we didn't. And going through the hatches with our air hoses on, and Pete told Commander Fuqua, he said, we're going to have some problems here with losing lifelines and air hoses and everything. So we called it off. After about 10 days, they called off all the diving and said, everybody's dead aboard the ship. There were 1,177 there. We pulled out maybe 5 or 6 bodies, but when you'd pull them out, they'd be up on the ceiling. You'd have to degas them with a stick them before, pulled them down and got them through the hatch and shoot them up to the other guys. It was gruesome, but something had to be done. But we didn't get that many out, and they just called it off. And so after that, Pete and I went into Captain Geisler. Commander Geisler was our executive officer, and they made him captain right away, and then they put him in Honolulu as provost marshal, because martial law was declared immediately, and without the help of an environmental impact report or meeting or anything else, they just declared it, and it worked until May of 1945. Nobody was allowed after sunset until sunrise, or they got shot. And if a military policeman or a policeman told you what to do, you did it without any question or answers or no, I don't think that's right or anything, you just did it.
Drawn into the fires of war, the United States quickly mobilized. The Japanese came to regret their failure to target the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers, which were away from Pearl Harbor on maneuvers on December 7th. These assets, along with the Japanese's failure to target fuel depots, repair facilities, and other vital infrastructure at Pearl Harbor, allowed the United States to turn the tide of war and begin the long road to victory just 6 months later, in June 1942, at the decisive Battle of Midway. At the end, more than 16 million Americans, over 12% of the population, served in the armed services during World War II. Lou Conter left Pearl Harbor to attend flight school in Pensacola, Florida, where he earned his wings November 1942. Mr. Conter joined the Navy's Black Cats. These Black Cats were long-range patrol bombers, painted black for nighttime operations, including surveillance, search and rescue, sea patrols, and nighttime bombing raids on Japanese naval ships. The war in the Pacific was brutal. Just over 100,000 Americans died in action in the Pacific theater alone. Lou Conter risked his life almost daily in intrepid service to our country.
And they decided we'd be the first Black Cat Squadron, which painted the planes completely black, no numbers, no flags or anything else on them. And we were going to South Pacific to fly night flights because Japanese didn't fly at nights, the Army Air Corps didn't fly at nights. And they'd drawn a line from Port Moresby across to Guadalcanal and said no Japanese south of this line. Because remember, the Japanese took over the Philippines and they were moving south, and they thought they were going to take over Australia and everything else, and they'd come back into Midway and Guam and Pearl Harbor. And Admiral Nimitz said, nobody south of this line. So we had 4 PBY squadrons down there to hold that thing. So we took off February of 43 at San Diego, 12 planes, 12 crews, at 5 to 6 o'clock at night. And 19 and a half hours later, the next noon, we landed in Kaneohe Bay. That's how long it took us to go from coast to Kaneohe in those days, 19 and a half hours. Some of them guys were up 21 hours and landed in Hilo, had to go down and refuel them and bring them back. An hour later, hour and a half later, we were up along the coast of New Guinea, about 7 miles off the coast south of Cape Gloucester and Wewak, and took a shell through the waste hatch and it hit one of the parachute flares and exploded in the waste hatch. Of course, we were fire. We had 2,000s and two 500-pound bombs under the wings, and full load of ammunition on the 50 calibers in the waste hatches, one on each side. And of course, we were fire from the engineering compartment aft immediately. Everybody came forward. Lambert got burnt pretty bad, but we got him forward. They closed the hatch off, and we had to land immediately. We were 700 feet when we landed in the open sea, 10, 15-foot swells. Got everybody out the pilot's escape hatch at the bottom of the ship, 10 men. But no lifeboats or no life jackets. And so Gordon Kennington, who was our lieutenant and he was our senior pilot, PPC, said to the guys, said, we're 7 miles off the coast, it's getting dark, I don't think anybody's going to be able to swim 7 miles to the coast in this sea, so say your prayers, you man, you know. And I said, no, you're still alive, grab hands, hold in a circle, kick your tread water real slowly, and if the sharks come up around you, hit them in the nose till they go away, and we'll see what we can do, but don't ever give up. So we were in the water about an hour and a half, and just before dark, remember down there, as the winter gets on, it's summer down there. It's winter up here, it's summer down in the south of the equator, so it's vice versa. It's just another PBY over saw us on fire and came back over, circled and saw they were in the water and didn't have a lifeboat, and they dropped a lifeboat to us. One of theirs, we each carried 2 lifeboats, 10-man lifeboats. And they couldn't inflate or anything, and they dropped it because if they inflated it, the wind would have carried it way away. So they dropped it, and I left the group of the guys who were holding the hands and told them to stay together, and we had 10 sharks all around them. And every few minutes they'd hit a shark and it'd spin and go out because their noses are very, very scent tender. And if you hit them with a slow fish, you're going to skin your hand a little bit because they're all the sharp. But they'll go away. They'll just zoom away. But anyway, we got into the beach there, 3 o'clock in the morning, and got everybody hidden, got them into the jungle, got them hidden, told them don't even let any gas out, be quiet, shut up, and don't even make a sound because there'll be plenty of sounds in the jungle for you, plus the fact the Japanese will be on our neck in a minute. So we stayed there quietly that day, that night, rest of the night and day. And the next night, we listened there for a minute, and I said to TD4, which was our main engineer, first class aviation machinist, I said, TD, I said, that's a PT boat I hear. He said, I think so. So we told the rest of the crew to stay hidden, don't make a sound, and we don't want their heads cut off because the Japanese were not taking any prisoners. And they believed in the Code of Bushido. And so we went out to the PT boat. We got as far as from here, that walk out there, maybe 100 feet away from the PT. And they had those 50 calibers pointed right at us. We couldn't see them very good, but they could see us. And I said, turn those goddamn guns away. And somebody on deck said, that's Conter. So we went aboard. And I said, we got to go back and get the other 8 guys. They're hiding in the jungle, know where they are. And they said, nope, you 2 are staying there. And they had 3 UDT men that they'd picked up and brought with them. In those days, the UDT men are the underwater demolition, which are the forerunners to the SEALs today. Nope, so I said, well, no, they wouldn't let me go. I said, okay, so I briefed them real good, where the guys were, what the main names were, and everything else. They went in there, and within 30 minutes, they were back with all 8 men. They were just fabulous. And the guys, when they got in there, they went into the jungle, and they knew right where to go. And they called the guys by name, and so they knew the way they called them by name that it was an American that was talking to them, and so they answered back, you know. And we got back to the ship, We operated off for the Half Moon and San Pablo, which were tenders, because we tied up with buoys. We couldn't land on land or anything. We had strictly seaplane. We got back that morning, debriefed, had breakfast, later on that day, supper that night, slept that night, and the next night at 5:30 we took another plane, went out for 13 and a half hours, and the same day. We got a call. The Australian Coast Watchers and Royal New Guinea Police were like our SEALs and Green Berets today. They were behind the lines in New Guinea and New Britain and sending us on radios, did out radios, all the intelligence, where the movements were and where we could bomb and everything. And they were up the Sepik River, and they made friends with one tribe up there, because most of the tribes were not serviceable. They were headhunters. They eat you if they got a chance. And the Japanese or other ones that forced them to be friends with theirs. But we had this one tribe, and we had dropped men in there behind the lines in New Britain and in New Guinea, and we serviced them. We dropped food and everything to them every couple of weeks. And they were up in the mountains and with these headhunters. And but they got surrounded by 3,000 or 4,000 Japanese out of Wewak, and they were within 10 miles, and they were all going to get captured and get their heads cut off. So we got a call from the 5th Air Force from General Kenny, and he said, I've got to get them out of there some way. And so we went in there and landed in the Sepik River 100 miles inland from Wewak. And the Sepik River is just like a snake river like this. So we had maybe 10, 20 feet on each side of the wingtip flying up the river from the trees like this. And we'd land in the river full of crocodiles and logs, taxi under the trees there, and they'd cut us off and they'd cover up the plane, and we'd get 15, 16 of the men in there and their gear and take off down the river. And as soon as we get off the river, the Japanese fighters would be on our tails. We'd jump into the clouds, because there are always clouds around raining in the river, Sepik River. And we'd go up to 8,500 feet, which was about our limit with that load, and we'd just circle in the clouds all the way up. We'd head straight south to fly between two peaks that were 12,000 feet. And you fly for an hour and 15 minutes and hadn't hit a peak, you know you were on the south side of New Guinea, so you throttle back and let down, because we didn't have anything in those days like they have today in the electronics. Going to Port Moresby and landed. Well, we had 4 crews of VP-11, and in 3 days we rescued 219 Australian Coast Watchers and Royal New Guinea Police that were our intelligence arms from behind the line of the Japanese there in December of '43 without a casualty. In fact, when we were there that one afternoon, the chief came up to us and said, why don't you guys stay overnight and leave in the morning, and I'll cook a good dinner for you. They were going to go down to the next tribe, which was 5, 6 miles away down the river, because the tribes were every 5, 10 miles, and get a young girl down there, 12 or 14 years old, and bring her back and cook her for dinner. And we said, no, thank you. So we have to get out. The Japanese are right there, and we have to get the planes back and everything else.
Why is it important? Because of the future of this country.
So we don't make the same mistake we made at Pearl.
I think it gives you background of what this country's all about. How those boys took off and did a job.
I would certainly pray that this don't happen to them like it happened to us.
You can bet that the men and women that we honor today and those who died that fateful morning 75 years ago never took a knee and never failed to stand whenever they heard our national anthem being played. Today we have a precious opportunity to reflect on what it means to be a patriot, to reflect on what it means to be a nation tested by war, and to reflect on both the costs and the blessings of liberty. They say that hindsight is 20/20, for history has shown us that the alarm bells had been sounding throughout the 1930s. As America looked eastward toward Europe, we watched as a military dictatorship in Germany began to grow in power, and fascist Italy allied itself to Nazi Germany. But we looked westward as well, where we saw the militaristic rise of Imperial Japan. In fact, we relocated the Pacific Fleet from California to Hawaii in 1940, a move designed to give pause to a potential adversary, the original rebalance in the Indo-Asia Pacific, if you will. Even so, 75 years ago, the United States was strategically surprised, caught flat-footed by Imperial Japan. The military and first responders here in the islands mustered an incredibly brave defense against staggering odds. They engaged the enemy as best they could with what they had. For those who gave their last full measure of devotion for their nation that day, we feel a deep sense of sorrow. Yet we're also inspired by their great gift to the world, the gift of freedom itself. They did not go quietly into that night, and along with those who survived, a reluctant nation emerged to fight and ultimately win World War II. Those who survived Pearl Harbor also left us a warning. Remember Pearl Harbor. Keep America alert. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, an imperative to never be caught by strategic surprise again.
I think it's important to remember Pearl Harbor. It exemplifies all the great things about America. Resilience, the ability to bounce back when things don't go right, and things don't go right a lot in life. So I think it typifies the American spirit, courage, determination, and we should never forget.
It's very important that all the school teachers set aside some time today, because today is Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, so proclaimed by the governor of my state, Wyoming. I notified every newspaper in the state of Wyoming to tell their teachers to set aside some time to talk to the children about World War II and Pearl Harbor, so we will never forget it, and that's important.
Well, according to our motto, remember Pearl Harbor, keep America alert.
I'm glad to be out here celebrating the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. We're out here at the USS Oklahoma today, and why this is poignant for us is I'm the Director of Operations for the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, and our responsibility is to identify all the unknowns, to the greatest extent possible, all the unknowns through the Second World War. And one of the biggest projects that we have is to identify the unknowns and the missing from the USS Oklahoma. And so to date there was 388 souls that were missing and unaccounted for, and to date we have identified 72 of them. And we're very proud of that. And what's important about that is not so much the number, and you'll hear about this today, it's more important that it continues the promise of our government, that we will never leave an American behind, ever. We will find them, if we can, and so that we can account for you. That's the great promise of our nation to its people.
I was on the USS Nevada, and I was about 3 decks below the main deck, and all I heard was, well, let me say, when it happened, I was sitting in my compartment, and I had my whites on. I was ready to go to church in the morning, and so I heard a rat-tat-tat out the porthole. So I stuck my head out the porthole, and I seen those planes out there, but I didn't pay any attention to any signal. And I said, what a hell of a time to hold a drill on a Sunday morning, you know. And then, of course, also then everybody had to go to general quarters to go to the battle station. And of course, you know, all the way down the bitch, you know, you have to do this on a Sunday morning. And so, like I say, I went down to my station. So then what really took place on top, I couldn't tell, because I was down 3 decks below. But the only thing I could feel then after a bit was we start getting on the way. You could feel the ship's vibration. It was good, and it seemed like they were trying to like back away and then get up and around. And then of course when we got hit with the torpedo, we could feel the jar, and oops, I think we got hit with something, what it was. But I still wasn't aware what really took place, whether we were actually in war or whether there's some stupid guy who was around here throwing rotten eggs at us or what. But let's say it was a real eye-opener.
You know, when you think about Pearl Harbor, you know, it's a day that obviously, as President Roosevelt said, a day that went down in infamy. But what you started that morning with was thousands and thousands of young boys, actually in the military, but by the end of the day they were full-grown men, having suffered the horrors of war firsthand. And they arose to the occasion and marched forth across the world to, you know, beat oppression and conquest by the Axis powers. And when you think of that and just how we entered the war, you know, it really did set the course. And when that generation came back, they built this country into what it was.
Hey, I'm Sam Cox. I'm the Director of Naval History and Heritage Command. And I think the significance of Pearl Harbor is there's multiple reasons to remember. One, it's an example of what happens to a country if you're not prepared to go to war and you become taken by surprise. The result is that many young Americans died as a result of that. Even so, they fought extremely bravely, with great valor, great courage, and they still today serve as an example of what Americans can do even under the most horrific of circumstances. And their example should inspire everyone in the future.
It's a good memory. It's a good memory. And like I've been making, for the last 3 weeks, I've been going to different places, they having me make speeches. And every time I get to the end of it, I get tears in my eyes. And I told them one time, I said, is it all right if an old man cries?
It's you kids that are in high school and graduating, going to college now, they're going to be running the United States in 10, 15, 20 years, and you better learn that you got to remember Pearl Harbor. And it's the best training in the world. It's tough, hard, on-site training, physically, mentally, and so forth, or you're not going to live through it. Thank you.